Hi folks, welcome to Locomotion, trains in the movies and the stories behind them. I'm Robert Diepenbrock.
And I'm Cathy Beard. Hop aboard as we discover together the fascinating and colorful history of trains in the movies, how they were made,
and the artists who created them.
Before we roll camera and open the throttle on our latest episode, subscribe to our channel and support us on Patreon.
This is the Reno. For more than 60 years, she and her siblings, the Inyo and the Dayton, were the railroad queens of the movies. They appeared in over 100 films alongside such stars as John Wayne, Judy Garland, Kirk Douglas, and Clint Eastwood.
These locomotives started their working lives on the Virginia and Truckee Railroad, running between Reno and Virginia City, Nevada. The Inyo and the Dayton are currently preserved at the Nevada State Railroad Museum, restored to their former glory. Until recently, the Reno sat baking in the desert sun, her fate uncertain.
Join us as we explore the parallel tracks of these movie legends.
And the Hollywood ending for the Reno.
In 1859, silver was discovered in the Nevada mountains southeast of Reno. What became known as the Comstock Lode sparked a silver rush rivaling the California gold rush of 10 years earlier. Miners flocked to Virginia City and Gold Hill, which overnight became bustling boom towns. Growing to over 25,000 inhabitants at its height, Virginia City was among the largest and wealthiest towns in the West. Multiple bonanzas spawned dozens of mines and mills that demanded huge amounts of timber, machinery, and supplies. Teams of 10 to 16 horses or mules hauling trains of 2 to 4 wagons was the only method of transport. 3-mile-long traffic jams blocked the streets of Virginia City and Gold Hill for hours. The cost of transporting supplies often outweighed the profits made by the mines, forcing many into foreclosure. The Bank of California, which held the notes on many of the loans, came into possession of these assets. A cheaper and more efficient form of transportation and shipping was needed to return the mines to profitability. William Sharman, the Bank of California's Nevada agent, envisioned a solution with a railroad from Virginia City to the state capital at Carson City. On June 18, 1868, the Transcontinental Railroad reached Reno, and a year later, on February 18, 1869, ground was broken on the Virginia and Truckee Railroad near Gold Hill. The first train ran between Carson City and Virginia City on January 20, 1870. While the route was only 21 miles long, it climbed over 1,600 feet and required 7 tunnels with curves equaling 17 full circles of track. 2 years later, the V&T connected Carson City to the Central Pacific at Reno on August 24, 1872. As the road's newest locomotive, number 11, appropriately named Reno, arrived at Virginia City with the first passenger train on September 15, 1872. The railroad connection at Reno gave Virginia City access to the rest of the country. William Sharman's low-cost transportation by rail idea paid off. The railroad transported ore down the mountain from the Comstock mines to the mills at Carson City and hauled timber, machinery, and equipment up the 2.2% grade to Virginia City and Gold Hill. Business for the railroad boomed, resulting in substantial profits for its investors, including William Sharman, who in 1875 became a California senator. Greater traffic demand called for additional motive power, and in 1873 the Reno was joined by locomotive number 18, the Dayton, and number 12, the Genoa. 240 number 21, J.W. Bowker, and number 22, the Inyo, were delivered in 1875. These 3 Baldwin-built 440 American Standard locomotives were nearly identical. They had 57-inch drivers and weighed 65 to 68,000 pounds. The Central Pacific Dayton had slightly larger 60-inch drivers and weighed in at 78,000 pounds. The Reno was the pride of the Virginia and Truckee, and her crews dubbed her the Brass Betsy. She was the main passenger power on the railroad, running between Virginia City and Reno, connecting with the Central Pacific's Overland Express. In 1876, the V&T inaugurated their own Lightning Express, providing high-speed daily passenger service between Virginia City and San Francisco. The Reno and the Genoa were the assigned motive power. At its peak, the Virginian Truckee owned 24 locomotives and ran as many as 40 trains a day between Carson City and Virginia City. For the next 50 years, the Virginian Truckee prospered, becoming known as the Queen of the Short Lines. When Ulysses S. Grant visited Virginia City in 1879, his train was pulled by the Reno. Number 11 was again on the point of President Theodore Roosevelt's special when he visited Carson City on May 19, 1903. By the early 1900s, the mines around Virginia City were starting to play out, and the production of silver dropped. However, mining continued for the next 40 years until 1918, when operating costs once again outweighed profits. During this period, the locomotives were converted from wood to coal and from coal to oil burning, which changed their appearance. The Reno was converted from wood to coal in 1876, then from coal to oil in 1907. The Dayton was fitted to burn oil in 1908, and the Inyo was converted directly from wood to oil in 1910. With the decline of mining traffic and the rise of automobiles and trucking in the early 1920s, the V&T lost most of its freight and passenger business, and in 1924, the railroad operated in the red for the first time. By the early 30s, the effects of the Depression had hit the V&T hard. After 4 more years of losses, management made plans to cease operations and dismantle the railroad. This included the rolling stock and locomotives, most of which were scheduled to be scrapped. Things looked bleak, but true to a classic movie script, in the nick of time, Hollywood came charging to the rescue.
In 1937, Paramount Pictures was looking for an authentic, old-time steam locomotive for its upcoming Western musical, High, Wide, and Handsome, starring Randolph Scott and Irene Dunn. Oliver Stratton, Paramount Property Department head, learned of the Virginia and Truckee and sent his assistant to Carson City, where he discovered 5 old steam locomotives in the engine house and dozens of 1800s-era railroad cars sitting idle in the yard. Paramount purchased one of these engines, number 22, the Inyo, for $1,250. The V&T mechanics changed out the straight stack for a period-looking diamond stack and installed an older box headlight. After her appearance in High, Wide, and Handsome, the Inyo shared the screen with Joel McCrea and Francis D. in Wells Fargo. The film called for a train to be pulled by number 22, so Paramount went back to the V&T and purchased 3 period passenger coaches. The ex-V&T equipment also appeared in 1938's The Texans, again starring Randolph Scott, and co-starring Joan Bennett. The Inyo and her sister locomotives were about to hit the big time, with starring roles in movie mogul and Paramount co-founder Cecil B. DeMille's 1938 railroad epic, Union Pacific. DeMille had already achieved a huge reputation as a producer and director, with silent spectacles such as The Virginian in 1914, The Squaw Man in 1918, 1923's The Ten Commandments, and King of Kings in 1927. Continuing his pattern of biblical epics with The Sign of the Cross, he made a successful transition to talkies in 1932. Union Pacific would feature DeMille's typical epic style, depicting the Transcontinental Railroad as its builders fought their way west across the plains, braving train wrecks, Indian attacks, robberies, avalanches, and burning trestles.
In June of 1938, Paramount bought 440 locomotive number 18, the Dayton, for $1,000 plus 17 other pieces of rolling stock from the Virginian truckee. They also leased number 11, the Reno, for the movie. DeMille had originally planned to film on the Virginian truckee, but after striking a deal with the Union Pacific, he decided to shoot the railroad sequences on their Cedar City branch in Utah, as it more closely matched the scenery the UP traversed during the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. The two engines and train cars were moved from Carson City to the Southern Pacific shops at Sparks, Nevada, east of Reno, where they were refurbished, repainted, and relettered Union Pacific. DeMille, the master of spectacle, apparently felt 3 locomotives weren't enough, so Paramount leased a 4th locomotive, former Virginian truckee 240 number 21 J.W. Bowker, which had been donated in 1927 to the Pacific chapter of the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society. Paramount's previous purchase, number 22, the Inyo, joined 18 the Dayton, 11 the Reno, and 21 the Bowker. Once again, these Virginian truckee locomotives were reunited in one place. They were now part of the largest private railroad in the country, prompting the studio to acquire a railroad operator's license from the Interstate Commerce Commission.
While the trains were prepped and sets constructed, DeMille was busy casting. Barbara Stanwyck would play the feisty Irish female postal agent Molly Monahan, who travels with the track crew train. Joel McCrea was cast as the hero Captain Jeff Butler. McCrea's character was based on civil engineer and troubleshooter Charles H. Sharman, who worked on the railroad from its start in Omaha, Nebraska, up to the Golden Spike ceremony on May 10, 1869. He is shown here in a Robert Russell photograph of the ceremony. The opening scenes of Union Pacific feature V&T number 21, the Bowker, renamed the General McPherson. DeMille was a traditional director, and this sequence is intercut between exterior location shots and those filmed on a studio soundstage using rear projections for the backgrounds. While this was a popular technique of the time, it unfortunately gives the film a dated look. Like DeMille's biblical epics, Union Pacific featured wide shots of a cast of thousands. This panorama of Cheyenne was built around the existing Union Pacific depot at Iron Springs, Utah. The Inyo, renumbered 66, is shown pulling in with a work train. This track-laying scene later in the film is equally epic. The V&T locomotives number 22, the Inyo, and number 18, the Dayton, are in the background as track crews slam down ties and rails and drive spikes. In an attempt to stop the Iron Horse from invading their lands, Sioux warriors attacked one of the trains. 300 Navajos were hired to portray the attacking braves, with local pinto horses rented for the filming. Cowboys had to be hired to control the ponies, as they were not trained stunt horses, and the gunshots and shouting would often cause them to bolt in the middle of the shot. The 7-car filming train was pulled by Union Pacific 280, number 6014, which provided power and maintained constant speed. A flat car was coupled directly behind with camera platforms, allowing shots down the length of the train led by locomotive number 22, the Inyo. The action cuts to a group of Indians chopping down a full-sized water tower in an attempt to stop the train. They pull the tank over on the locomotive, causing a spectacular crash.
The Paramount Prop Department built a 1/12 scale model of the locomotive, train, and water tower. The first 5 cars were rigged to be demolished on impact. Several of the 1/12 scale miniature train cars used in Union Pacific are part of the collection at the Nevada State Railroad Museum. Typically, special effects miniature shots are made after live filming is completed, and it's the task of the effects technicians to match the miniatures with the live action. This comparison of the miniatures with the full-size cars shows the accuracy and fidelity to detail. The miniatures in Union Pacific were nominated for Best Visual Effects in the 1940 Academy Awards, the first year the category was included. As the action continues, the attacking Indians swarm over the wrecked locomotive and train. DeMille used a full-size locomotive shot on location. The crew substituted V&T number 11, the Reno, for the Inyo as the engines were virtually identical. A Union Pacific Railroad crane laid number 11 on its side next to the track, and the crew then covered it with debris to make the scene look convincing. Unfortunately, when filming the scene was completed and number 11 was pulled back up, a significant amount of damage to the cab, boiler, and running gear was revealed. Because Paramount had leased the Reno from the Virginian truckee, the studio was forced to transport number 11 to the Southern Pacific shops in LA for repair before it was shipped back to the V&T.
In January 1939, the production moved from Utah to the San Fernando Valley, 20 miles northeast of Hollywood, for the final scenes of the Golden Spike ceremony at Promontory Summit. Ever the promoter, DeMille did this for two reasons. First, the weather in Utah was turning cold and wintry, and second, he could stage the climax of his movie and create a public relations event in Hollywood's backyard at the same time. Paramount had a spur laid off the San Fernando Valley line in Chatsworth. Locomotive number 18, the Dayton, appeared as Union Pacific 119, and number 22, the Inyo, was redressed and repainted as Central Pacific's Jupiter. The Hollywood press was invited to view the filming, with an authentic Irish luncheon afterwards, consisting of corned beef and cabbage. Not your usual Hollywood-catered affair. Due to a heart condition, DeMille fell ill due to the strain of the massive production, and bed rest was ordered by his doctor. So DeMille directed the Golden Spike scene from a bed on a raised camera platform. Whether he was actually ill or couldn't resist staging a publicity stunt, we'll never really know. Probably both. DeMille, Paramount, and Union Pacific teamed up to promote the premiere of the movie with typical Hollywood hoopla. A special train was assembled to whisk Stanwyck, DeMille, other cast members, and notables from Los Angeles to the world premiere in Omaha, Union Pacific's headquarters.
The railroad decided to unveil their massive new experimental General Electric steam turbines number 1 and 2 to pull the train. Rated at 2,500 horsepower each and capable of speeds up to 125 miles an hour, these units represented the state-of-the-art in railroad motive power, and the Union Pacific was eager to show them off. On April 1, 1939, UP 1 and 2 left General Electric's Erie, Pennsylvania shops and headed west. Union Pacific took delivery of the gleaming new turbines at their main yards in Council Bluffs, Iowa. The Dayton was transformed from her Golden Spike movie garb as number 119 to UP number 58 in the Union Pacific Los Angeles shops. On April 24, 1939, she was coupled in front of Union Pacific's turbines 1 and 2, resplendent in UP armor yellow and adorned with Art Deco chrome badging. The premier train was quite a sight, as seen in this photograph by noted railroad photographer Otto Perry.
As the train headed east, crowds gathered at every stop to ogle the train and the stars. Barbara Stanwyck traveled in her own private Pullman car. When the train pulled into Omaha Union Station on April 26th, the platform was packed so tightly that a path had to be cleared by the National Guard before DeMille and company could disembark. The arrival in Omaha was followed by a 3-day celebration, dubbed Golden Spike Days, commemorating the 70th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. As part of the celebration, Union Pacific Chairman W.A. Harriman and Cecil B. DeMille dedicated a 50-foot Golden Spike monument at Council Bluffs, Iowa, across the Missouri River from Omaha, marking Mile Zero, the eastern terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad. Schools were officially closed, and crowds of over 250,000 thronged into town. doubling Omaha's population and requiring the deployment of the National Guard to maintain order. Parades, banquets, a costume ball, cast member appearances, and radio broadcasts led up to the biggest premiere in motion picture history in 3 Omaha theaters simultaneously. Citizens paid scalpers $11 apiece for tickets. Souvenir programs and brass gold spike replicas were given to attendees.
After the premiere, the Dayton returned to Los Angeles from Omaha and appeared on May 3, 1939, with her sister, number 22, the Inyo, promoting Union Pacific at the opening of the new Los Angeles passenger terminal. Dayton posed at the station platform with DeMille and guests, while Inyo led a train of dignitaries in a grand parade up Alameda Street, as seen in this rare footage shot by Disney animator and train fan Ward Kimball. Dayton, as old number 58, also took part in a photo op with 3 of the Union Pacific's latest locomotives: UP Turbine number 1, E3A Diesel LA5, power for the Streamliner City of Los Angeles, and 4664 Challenger number 3939. DeMille wasn't done promoting the film and assembled Cecil B. DeMille's Union Pacific Paramount Special Train, again led by the Dayton as UP number 58, followed by passenger and freight cars from the movie. The train made a 15-day, 12,000-mile promotional tour, stopping at 30 cities around the country, returning to Los Angeles on June 7th.
After Union Pacific, the 4 locomotives went their separate ways. The damaged and repaired Reno continued to run on the Virginia and Truckee, hauling chartered trains of rail enthusiasts who knew that the days of the V&T were numbered. The 2 Paramount-owned locomotives number 18 Dayton and 22 Inyo were stored at the Union Pacific yards in Los Angeles and leased to various Hollywood studios. They would appear in numerous movies during the Western film heydays of the 1940s and 50s. The Bowker was returned to the California chapter of the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, and then sent to New York, appearing as part of the Railroads on Parade exhibit at the World's Fair at Flushing Meadows from April 1939 to October 1940. Very different fates awaited these locomotives. They would eventually be reunited, but not for many years.
In Part 2 of Parallel Tracks, we'll explore the movie careers of the Reno, the Inyo, and the Dayton, and the films they appeared in, the retirement to museums of numbers 22 and 18, and the fate of the Reno after her near destruction in a devastating fire. Look for this fascinating second part coming soon.
Thanks for watching, and until next time,
All aboard and action!